It was the second Thursday in March when he first saw her, red coat against gray skies, standing under a bus shelter that had long stopped pretending it worked. Rain was being swept sideways, and her eyes, narrowed and tired, stared ahead at nothing with a practiced stillness that made her seem untouchable. Adrian couldn't explain why he stopped running and stood half-hidden beneath a skeletal maple tree, watching her fidget with a lighter that clearly didn't work either. She wasn't beautiful in the way young men his age usually defined it, no perfectly smooth skin, no synthetic glow of curated youth, but she was something else entirely, imperfect, alive, brimming with a strange, defiant grief that made her seem almost too real for the world around her. He watched her curse at the wind, toss the lighter into a nearby puddle, and try again with a half-broken match. The flame flared, sputtered, died. He moved before he thought, stepping forward like someone walking into traffic. His voice, warm despite the cold air, carried just enough hesitance to not seem arrogant. "Need a light?" She didn't flinch, but she did turn toward him with a look that pinned him down and stripped him bare. "What are you, 20? You think that's a line that still works?" He offered the matchbook anyway. "No. But I don't think you actually want a cigarette." That pause, slight, involuntary, electric. A subtle shift in her body, the way her shoulders lowered just a fraction as if someone had suddenly turned down the volume on the noise in her head. He'd hit something. Not a nerve exactly, but a boundary she wasn't ready to admit existed. He was standing close now, absurdly tall next to her, and she was looking up at him not with interest, but with confusion. He wasn't supposed to notice. He wasn't supposed to see her as more than a shadow in the rain. She exhaled, dropped the unlit cigarette, and stepped back. "I don't need saving, kid." He smiled without backing away. "Good. I'm not a hero." It would have ended there if not for the second meeting, or rather, the second sighting. A week later, in the back row of a lecture hall he never went to, Adrian saw her again. This time dressed in something sleek but careless, flipping through papers in the corner while a guest professor gave a lecture on modern art and the crisis of meaning. She was clearly faculty, though she didn't look it in the traditional sense, too sharp around the edges, too unbothered by the performance of academia. Her name, overheard in a conversation he wasn't meant to hear, was Mara Langston. He said it to himself like a secret prayer, like a key he wasn't supposed to find. The third time was no accident. He stayed late in the campus cafe and saw her in the corner with a book and a glass of wine no one carded her for. She looked exhausted, like someone trying to escape a day that had overstayed its welcome. He sat across from her without asking. "You're following me," she said flatly, not looking up. "No," he answered, leaning forward, "but I'd like to." And for the first time in what looked like 1,000 years, she smiled. Not a quick, polite lift of the lips, but a slow, puzzled, involuntary pull that started somewhere deep inside and emerged only when she realized he was not going to look away. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the kind of smile that happens when someone stops drowning, just for a breath, just long enough to remember that they once had lungs. They didn't exchange numbers. She got up and left him there, book half read, wine half finished. But her smile, her real, quiet, uncertain smile, was still there in the room after she'd gone. That was the beginning. The moment something shifted, not because it was dramatic or grand, but because it was honest. He saw her as she was. And worse, better, she saw that he had. Their first actual conversation, real, direct, unguarded, happened not in some romantic twilight or cafe-lit moment, but in the dim light of a faculty lounge neither of them belonged in at that hour. Mara sat at the far end of a scratched-up table with her boots kicked off and one arm flung carelessly over the back of her chair, wine bottle on the floor, not even pretending to grade the stack of unmarked essays beside her. Adrian entered without knocking, without reason, carrying nothing but the weight of a day spent circling the idea of her. She looked up, already exhaling a warning, but it died before it reached her lips. He sat beside her like he'd been doing it for years. She glanced at him, amused and a little tired. "You know you're not supposed to be here. Neither are you. I work here. You live here. There's a difference." Her laugh was the dry, ironic kind that doesn't chase joy but recognizes it from a distance. She didn't ask why he came. He didn't offer. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was something else. Something waiting to be claimed. That night she told him about her divorce. Briefly. Without romance or tragedy, just a clean surgical cut between two timelines. He thought he was in love with me, she said. He wasn't. He was in love with a version of me I didn't survive. Adrian didn't respond with sympathy. He only nodded, and after a long pause said, I haven't spoken to my dad in 6 years. He thinks I'm weak. My mom calls once a month to see if I've figured out how to be someone else yet. Mara turned then, not dramatically, not suddenly, but with an awareness that something between them was becoming real, dangerous, irreversible. We're a pair, aren't we? He didn't smile. No. We're the shadow under the pair. She took a drink. You talk like a poet. No, I talk like someone who reads them. It wasn't sex that pulled them close that night, though desire burned underneath like coals not yet stirred. It was recognition. The silent, aching knowledge that they were both walking damage, too familiar with betrayal to be surprised by it, too intelligent to fully trust that what was happening between them could last. Still, it grew. Fast, quiet, reckless. In public, they passed each other like co-workers. In private, they were feral with honesty. He knew the scar on her hip she'd never told anyone about. She knew the look in his eyes when his panic attacks started to swell, the quiet rituals he used to keep from shaking apart. She made him feel older. He made her feel unfinished. And then came the rumors. It began with a laugh behind a door left slightly open, a girl's voice in the student union saying, I swear to God, he's seeing someone older. Like way older. Another voice chimed in, mocking, cougar alert. He's totally got that rescued puppy energy. He tried to laugh it off, but it stuck like bad perfume. People stared longer. Some professors called on him with strange tones, like they were testing him. A friend of his, Jordan, who'd always been loud and oblivious, made a crack in front of the whole film club about Adrian's mommy fetish. Laughter. Pause. Adrian leaving without a word. He didn't tell Mara. She noticed anyway. But it wasn't until the letter arrived that things shifted into something colder. It came in a plain envelope. No return address. Slid under Mara's office door during a departmental seminar she'd excused herself from. The letter was short, printed from a typewriter or made to look like it had been. You're not as invisible as you think. Staff talk. Students whisper. You've got one chance to end it clean before the wrong person finds out. There was no name. No signature. Just threat. Mara called Adrian that night. Her voice didn't shake, but it was too controlled to be natural. She read the letter to him once. He listened in silence, his fists clenched, heart throttling against his ribs. I'll take care of it, he said, but she stopped him. No. You'll do nothing. What, we just wait around until someone outs us? This isn't. This is real life, Adrian. You want to burn it down because it hurts. I want to keep what little I've rebuilt. There was silence, heavy and honest. Do you want to stop? He asked. She didn't answer. That was their climax, not a fight, not a dramatic breakup, but a slow breath between survival and surrender. Neither of them knew what would come next. But something had cracked, and it would never go back to what it was. They stopped talking in daylight. It wasn't something they agreed on, not some pact born from paranoia, but a slow evolution in self-preservation. The risk was too loud under fluorescent lights. Their world retreated into darkness, texts that turned into voice notes whispered at 1:37 a.m., car rides through neighborhoods neither of them lived in, stolen time beneath flickering street lamps or in parked cars behind shuttered strip malls. The nights became their truth. Everything else was just survival. Adrian started keeping odd hours. Friends stopped asking where he was going after 10. His roommates shrugged him off as just in a weird phase. Only Jordan pressed once, after Adrian missed a weekend hangout for the third time. You're not shooting dope or something, right? Jordan laughed, a little too hard. Adrian didn't laugh back. Mara changed in subtler ways. She became colder in faculty meetings, sharper in her lectures, but looser after 8 p.m., like her skin didn't fit right during the day. She took to pouring her wine into a coffee mug at home. When Adrian sat beside her on the floor, knees touching, she'd sometimes turn to him and say, "It doesn't feel like me anymore. The rest of my life. It's like I'm watching someone else play it out." He understood completely. Because when she touched his face, when he leaned into the curve of her collarbone, he wasn't the failure his parents whispered about, wasn't the too sensitive, too theatrical boy his father mocked. He was a man. Not in the performative way boys on campus performed masculinity, but real, attentive, awake. One night in her apartment, as thunder crept low across the sky and the city lights blurred behind rain-wet windows, Adrian watched Mara sleep. She looked younger when she wasn't armored, lips parted, one arm slung over her forehead like a woman who forgot she didn't trust the world. He thought of taking a picture but didn't. Some moments aren't meant to be stolen, even by memory. In the hush before dawn, she stirred, eyes still closed, murmuring, "I used to want a child." Adrian swallowed something that hurt. "What stopped you?" She opened her eyes. Everything that came after wanting. They didn't speak again until the sun rose. That same week, they were seen. It wasn't intentional, and it wasn't obvious. They weren't kissing. They weren't touching. But they were together. Too closely. Too comfortably. A Tuesday night, late, walking out of a corner Thai place 2 neighborhoods away from campus, Mara laughing at something he'd said about the way her left eyebrow twitched when she was about to lie. It was light. It was real. And someone saw it. She caught it first, a figure, hesitating across the street. Not one of her colleagues. Not one of his friends. But familiar. Eyes locked for a split second too long. She didn't stop walking. She didn't grab his hand or pretend. But her body tensed like a hunted thing. Later, when he asked if she recognized them, she said, "Maybe. Doesn't matter." But it did. 2 days later, one of her lectures had a new face, a student from the department who wasn't enrolled. Sat in the back, taking notes. Never asked a question. That night, Mara paced. Adrian sat on the floor, back against her bookshelf, watching her wear a track into the carpet. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She stopped. "What, you?" "No. This. Us." She came to him, slow, and lowered herself into his lap. Her fingers curled into his shirt. "It's the only part of my life that doesn't feel like a lie." He closed his eyes. "Then why does it feel like it's dying?" She didn't answer. Neither of them said it aloud, but it hung between them like static. They had been seen, and the clock had started ticking. Someone would talk. Someone always talks. And they couldn't live in nighttime forever. But still they returned. Again and again, to that quiet space after dark where the world blurred just enough for them to be honest. They spoke of nothing important and everything sacred, how her mother used to bake bread that made the whole house smell like safety, how he used to pretend he was sick just to avoid gym class, how both of them felt like the person they became around each other was someone they could almost believe in. She whispered once, voice raw, "You remind me I'm not dead." He whispered back, "You remind me I haven't finished becoming." That night, they didn't make love. They just lay together, skin against skin, 2 broken shapes pretending they might still form something complete. And outside, the world began sharpening its teeth. It was never going to stay hidden. Not in a town like theirs, where the academic and social worlds blurred and echoed louder than anyone liked to admit. It only took one person with half a reason and too much time to push the secret out of the quiet. And it was Mara's sister who found out first. Her name was Elise, older by 2 years but younger in almost every other way. She lived on the high edge of a curated life, suburban, 2 kids, a husband who wore polo shirts to church and pretended to forget he'd cheated 3 summers ago. Elise didn't approve of chaos. She especially didn't approve of Mara having any. They were sitting in Mara's kitchen, midday, daylight, wine poured under the guise of casual sisterhood, when Elise said it. "You know, someone saw you with a student last week. A boy." Tall. Pretty. Looked like trouble. Mara didn't blink. That's a hell of a thing to bring up over Sauvignon Blanc. You gonna deny it? No. There it was. No sidestepping. No performance. Just a flat, clean admission. But it was the way Mara said it, without guilt, without shame, that set Elise off. Jesus, Mara. You're 42. He's what, barely legal? Do you even hear yourself? I hear myself fine. I just don't care what I sound like to you. Is this a midlife thing? Or are you just tired of pretending you're better than the rest of us? Mara took a slow sip of her wine. Maybe I got tired of playing a game I never believed in. Elise stared at her like she was something broken. You're going to ruin your reputation. I already did, Mara said. I married a man who hollowed me out. I spent a decade pretending I loved tenure more than I hated the silence. This? Him? It's the only honest thing I've felt in years. And Elise, with all her order and rules and performative morality, just couldn't hold that. So she did what people do when they can't control something, they fed it to the crowd. The wedding was inevitable. Not theirs, of course. It was a colleague's small university staff affair, full of polite wine and polite gossip and polite smiles. Mara went out of duty. Adrian went because she asked him to. They didn't arrive together. They didn't sit together. But every glance was a story, and someone else was reading it. It wasn't even a dramatic confrontation. No yelling. No overturned tables. It happened in the lull after dinner, during the slide into jazz and awkward dancing. The university president's wife, sleek, judgmental, dangerously observant, walked up to Mara with a wineglass in one hand and a secret in the other. I couldn't help but notice the intensity between you and one of our students, she said, all teeth beneath a smile. Mara didn't flinch. Then you must have a very good eye. A pause. A breath. The air pulled taut. You know how that will look. Mara smiled back, but there was no warmth in it. I know how it feels. And that was when Adrian walked past. Not toward her. Just past. But close enough that the room turned. Close enough that anyone who hadn't already guessed would guess now. His hand brushed her back. Barely. Intentionally. Silence rippled out in waves. Someone dropped a glass. Laughter died. The pianist stumbled over a chord. All eyes on them. Mara turned toward him. Not coy. Not apologetic. She stepped forward, took his hand, and pulled him gently into the middle of the dance floor. No music played. They danced anyway. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't choreographed. But it was real. And in the silence, in the fire of every watching gaze, Mara looked up at him and said, loud enough for at least 3 people to hear, I'm not sorry. He didn't say anything. He just held her closer. Later, in the cold air outside, beneath the amber streetlight haze, he lit a cigarette he didn't smoke and passed it to her. She took it. Inhaled. Exhaled. I guess we're out now, he said. She nodded. It was never going to stay a secret. Do you regret it? She looked at him for a long, long time. Then kissed him in the dark. When they pulled apart, she said, ask me again in the morning. The morning after the wedding was quieter than it should have been. The kind of quiet that feels like a held breath, like something sacred just happened and the world hasn't caught up yet. Mara woke first, already half-dressed, standing by the window with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Adrian stirred in her bed, blinking against the sunlight like it was something new he hadn't yet earned. She didn't speak until he sat up. And even then, she only said, they'll come for me first. He nodded, running his fingers through his hair. I know. They'll use you as proof. But I'll be the weapon. Adrian slid his feet to the floor, elbows on knees, voice flat. Do you want me to lie? She turned. Her face didn't hold regret, only the weight of clarity. No. I just want you to understand that telling the truth won't save either of us. He stood, crossed the space between them, and rested his forehead against hers. Then let's not pretend it was anything less than real. The fallout started within the week. Someone leaked a faculty complaint and signed, of course, citing inappropriate conduct with a student. The dean called Mara in for a meeting she described to Adrian afterward as bloodless, professional, and utterly void of backbone. There was no hard evidence, only eyes and whispers, but in institutions like theirs, sometimes that was enough. Mara wasn't fired. But she was asked to consider stepping away quietly at the end of the semester to preserve the integrity of the department. Adrian found himself under a different spotlight. Campus security pulled him aside after class. Just a conversation, they said. Just ensuring safety. Rumors spread faster now. Students stopped sitting near him. Professors forgot his name. He became something slippery in conversation, that kid, the one with the thing, you know, him. One night, in her apartment, he asked the question neither of them had dared to say aloud. Do you think this ends with us hating each other? She looked up from the floor. No. But I think it ends. He didn't speak. Just nodded, once. Not in agreement, but in understanding. The night they ended it, it didn't feel like a breakup. There were no tears, no shouting, no begging. Just two people holding a silence too large for the room they were in. She packed a small box of his things, his copy of Siddhartha, a scarf he'd left in her car, a shirt she'd once worn when the heat went out. He took the box and said, I never thought I'd fall in love with someone who could break me by doing the right thing. She touched his face, so gently it made him ache. You didn't fall in love with someone old, Adrian. You fell in love with someone tired. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. They saw each other once more, a month later. By accident. A bookstore downtown. She was holding a book on art theory. He was reaching for a novel in the same aisle. Their hands brushed. They froze. No hug. No conversation. Just eyes that said everything. I remember. You mattered. I'm still here, but I'm no longer yours. She left first. He didn't follow. 3 months later. Adrian sat in the campus cafe, earphones in, notebook open but blank. Someone slid into the seat across from him, a friend, maybe. Someone who didn't know the story, or pretended not to. You hear about that professor who resigned? They asked. Langston, I think? Rumors were wild. Some kid, supposedly. Adrian smiled, faint and unreadable. People always want a better story than the truth. Yeah? What's the truth? He sipped his coffee and said that sometimes people find each other at the wrong time. And sometimes they're lucky enough to feel alive again before it ends. The friend laughed, already distracted. Sounds poetic. You should write that down. But he didn't. Because it wasn't something meant to be saved. It was something meant to be lived. The page is blank. The sun is high. Somewhere, Mara is walking through a city where no one knows her. Somewhere, Adrian is stepping into a life still uncertain, still raw. They don't speak anymore. But sometimes, when the air is just right, when the quiet settles in too heavily, they both reach for the same silence. Not all love survives. But some loves teach you how to speak. Some loves leave the question. Would you do it all again? And that answer, the one that matters, never gets said out loud.